The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 40,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once doubted their own power or wisdom. 12 elder species sat upon the High Council, each one ancient beyond human understanding, each one convinced that they alone knew what was best for the galaxy. High Arbiter Velcrath of the Thelvari species held the highest seat among them. His pale blue skin stretched tight over a skull that housed a brain capable of processing information faster than most computers. He had lived for 3,000 years and had seen empires rise and fall like waves upon a cosmic short day. However, something troubled him deeply. The sensors had detected a new signature from a small blue planet on the edge of the outer rim. A world called Earth by its inhabitants. These creatures, these humans, had just achieved faster-than-light travel. How long did it take them? Asked Admiral Kethril, his mandibles clicking with nervous energy. Less than 400 years from their first powered flight, replied the science advisor. Her voice trembling slightly, a murmur of disbelief rippled through the council chamber. Thelvari had taken 12,000 years to achieve the same milestone. The Moraviks had needed 8,000. Even the brilliant Kelvorians had required 5,000 years of steady progress, but humans had done it in 400 years. A blink of an eye in galactic terms. Volkrath raised one long-fingered hand and silence fell instantly across the chamber. "Show me the projections," he commanded. The holographic display flickered to life, showing mathematical models and probability curves that made even the ancient council members shift uncomfortably in their seats if left unchecked. Humanity would spread across 100 star systems within 2 centuries. Within 5 centuries, they would rival the Concord itself in power and influence. Within 1,000 years, they would dominate the galaxy entirely. "This cannot be allowed," Velcrath declared, his voice cold and certain as the void between stars. The council voted unanimously, as they always did when faced with a potential threat. 300 warships of the Purification Fleet would travel to Earth and cleanse it of human life before the infection could spread. It was not cruelty, Velcrath told himself. It was simply pest control. It was simply the way things had always been done. The fleet arrived in Earth's solar system on a bright Tuesday morning. Though the humans on the surface had no way of knowing what was coming, Admiral Gorath of the Kelvarian species commanded the operation from the bridge of his massive flagship. Looking down at the blue and green world with something approaching boredom, he had performed this duty 17 times before. Wiping out young species before they could become problems. This would be no different. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered casually. As if asking for a cup of tea, the first wave of kinetic strikes hit the major population centers. Simultaneously, New York vanished in a flash of light, and Fire Tokyo crumbled under the force of impacts that registered on seismographs around the world. London, Paris, Beijing, Mumbai, Sydney, Cairo, Moscow, Rio de Janeiro, one by one. The great cities of Earth died screaming. Admiral Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force watched from her command center, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, as her world burned above her. She was 63 years old, had served in the military for 40 years, and had never once imagined that she would witness the extinction of her species around her. Officers wept openly as the reports came flooding in. 4 billion dead in the first hour alone. The surface was becoming uninhabitable as fire spread across entire continents. Earth's primitive defense fleet, just 27 ships, had been vaporized in the first 30 seconds of the attack, but Admiral Vasquez did not weep. Instead, she turned to her communications officer with eyes that burned with a fury beyond words. "Are the colony ships away?" she demanded. "Yes, Admiral," came the reply. 12 ships carrying 200,000 survivors have made it past the enemy fleet and are heading for deep space at maximum speed. Vasquez nodded slowly, a grim smile crossing her weathered face. The colony ships had been a secret project, hidden even from most of Earth's governments. Designed as a last resort in case of exactly this scenario, they carried the best and brightest of humanity, along with genetic samples, cultural archives, and most importantly, the complete technological database of human civilization. Send them the final message, Vasquez ordered. The communications officer typed quickly, transmitting a coded burst that would reach the fleeing ships in a matter of minutes. The message contained coordinates for a distant world far beyond the reach of the Galactic Concorde, a frozen planet that surveys had deemed potentially habitable. It also contained one final order from Admiral Vasquez herself: survive, rebuild, and never forget what was done here today, above the burning Earth. Admiral Gorath watched the destruction with satisfaction. His sensors showed no escaping vessels, no signs of resistance. Nothing but a dying world and its dying people. He had no way of knowing that 12 small ships had slipped away using experimental stealth technology. Their signatures masked by the chaos of the bombardment. Transmit victory to the High Council, Gorath ordered. Already thinking about his reward for this successful mission, Earth has been purified, and the human threat has been eliminated deep beneath the mountains. Admiral Vasquez heard the alien transmission through intercepted communications. She laughed bitterly, blood dripping from a wound on her forehead where falling debris had struck her. The bunker was collapsing around her, and she knew she had only minutes left to live. But she also knew something that the arrogant aliens did not. Humanity was not dead. 200,000 survivors were racing through the darkness of space, carrying with them the memory of this day and a burning desire for revenge that would never fade. Vasquez keyed in one final transmission, broadcasting on every frequency her damaged equipment could reach. "We will remember," she said simply, her voice steady despite the destruction around her. "And one day, we will return." Then the bunker collapsed, and Admiral Vasquez died along with her world in the cold depths of space. 12 colony ships received her final words and carved them into the walls of their vessels. The children born on those ships would learn those words before they learned to walk. Their children would teach those words to their own offspring and generations later. When humanity finally returned to the stars, those words would become a battle cry that would shake the very foundations of the Galactic Concorde. The elder species believed they had prevented a future threat. They had no idea that they had just created the greatest nightmare the galaxy would ever know. 50 years passed in the cold silence of space, and the Galactic Concorde forgot about Earth as easily as one might forget a bug crushed beneath their foot. The High Council archived the destruction as another successful culling and moved on to other matters, never once suspecting that their greatest mistake was growing stronger with each passing day far beyond the borders of known space. On a frozen world that the survivors had named Remembrance, humanity was transforming into something new and terrifying. The planet was harsh and unforgiving, with temperatures that dropped to -60 degrees during the long winters and thin air that made every breath a struggle. But the survivors did not complain, for they knew that hardship would make them stronger. Alana Vasquez was born 3 years after the landing, the daughter of Admiral Maria Vasquez's younger brother, and she carried her family name like a sacred burden from the moment she could understand words. She was taught the history of Earth's destruction. She watched the footage of burning cities before she learned to read. She memorized the names of every species that had voted for humanity's extinction before she learned basic mathematics, and she swore an oath of vengeance before she celebrated her 10th birthday. The colony's founding charter was simple and absolute, carved into a massive steel monument at the center of their underground city. It read, "Return. reclaim, revenge. Every child born on remembrance learned these 3 words as their first lesson, and every adult repeated them as a daily prayer. There was no room for weakness in this new humanity. No tolerance for those who suggested forgiveness or moving on. The alien butchers had shown no mercy to Earth, and Earth's children would show no mercy in return. Helena rose through the ranks of the colonial military with terrifying speed, her tactical genius becoming apparent by the time she was 15. At 20, she commanded her first warship. At 30, she led the entire fleet, and at 45, she became supreme commander of all human forces, the most powerful position in their small but deadly civilization. Under her leadership, human scientists worked day and night to reverse engineer the alien technology that the colony ships had managed to capture during their escape within a decade. They understood it completely within 2 decades. They had improved it beyond anything the Concorde had ever imagined. The gravity lance was humanity's first true weapon, a device capable of manipulating gravitational forces with such precision that it could tear a starship apart at the molecular level. The Concorde had gravity manipulation technology, but nothing like this. Nothing so focused and so deadly. Human engineers had taken the basic principles and pushed them to their absolute limits, creating a weapon of terrifying efficiency. The phase cloak came next, a stealth system that could render entire fleets invisible to all known forms of detection. Ships equipped with this technology could appear and disappear at will, striking from nowhere and vanishing before the enemy could respond. It was the perfect tool for a species that intended to wage a war of vengeance against a numerically superior foe, but the most feared creation of human ingenuity was the drone swarm. Self-replicating machines that could learn and adapt in real time. Each drone was no larger than a human fist, armed with a tiny but powerful laser, and connected to every other drone through a quantum communication network. When one drone learned a new tactic or discovered a weakness in enemy defenses, all drones learned it instantly. They could consume raw materials from destroyed ships to create more of themselves, growing stronger with every battle. The first test of human weapons came when Helena ordered a strike against 3 remote Concorde colonies on the outer edge of explored space. The attacks were simultaneous, and absolute. Human ships materialized from nothing, unleashed devastating firepower, and disappeared before the colonial defense forces could even power up their weapons. No buildings were left standing. No survivors were permitted to escape. No evidence was left behind except for a single message beacon floating in the debris, broadcasting 3 words in every galactic language: Earth remembers, High Arbiter. Velcroth received the reports with mild confusion. 3 colonies had been destroyed by an unknown force, but his advisors assured him it was probably just pirates or a rogue faction from one of the lesser species. The idea that the humans had survived never crossed his mind after all. The purification fleet had been thorough, and primitive species did not simply rebuild from extinction. Helena watched the Concorde's response from her command center on Remembrance and smiled coldly. They were complacent, arrogant, so convinced of their own superiority that they could not imagine a threat emerging from the ashes they had created. This blindness would be their downfall for the next 5 years. Human attacks continued at irregular intervals, always targeting isolated outposts and supply lines, never striking hard enough to provoke a serious response. Each attack served multiple purposes: gathering intelligence, testing new weapons, and training the next generation of warriors. Helena was patient in a way that only someone raised on vengeance could be. She knew that rushing the final assault would lead to failure, and failure was not an option when the ghosts of 4 billion dead demanded justice. The young warriors of Remembrance grew restless, eager to strike at the heart of the Concorde immediately. But Helena held them back with iron discipline. Our enemies have ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years, she told them during a training exercise. They have destroyed hundreds of species without consequence, and they believe themselves invincible because no one has ever truly challenged them before. She paused and looked out at the frozen landscape that had been their home for half a century. We will not be another victim species that fights bravely and dies uselessly, she continued, her voice hard as the ice beneath their feet. We will be the last thing they ever see, the nightmare they never knew was coming, the justice that Earth has demanded since the day it burned. The warriors saluted and returned to their training with renewed determination in the depths of space. Human factories worked constantly, producing ships and weapons and drones at a rate that would have seemed impossible to the lazy aristocrats of the Concord on 100 different worlds. Concord citizens went about their daily lives without any idea that death was coming for them. Silent and patient and absolutely without mercy. The silent years were ending. The time for revenge had finally arrived. The Calvorian homeworld had stood for 60,000 years. A monument to one of the galaxy's oldest and proudest civilizations. Its crystal towers reached toward the heavens. Its floating cities drifted gracefully through pink-tinged skies. And its population of 12 billion. Souls went about their daily lives without the slightest concern for their safety after all. The Calvorians were members of the mighty Galactic Concord, protected by the greatest military force the universe had ever known. What could possibly threaten them? The answer came at dawn on the first day of their sacred festival of stars. When human warships materialized directly above their major population centers, there was no warning. No declaration of war, no demand for surrender there. Was only fire gravity lances tore through the crystal towers like invisible. Hands-crushing delicate glass-drone swarms descended upon the floating cities and consumed them from the inside out. Kinetic strikes turned ancient monuments into craters of molten rock. The Calvorian defense fleet scrambled desperately to respond, but their ships were destroyed before they could even achieve orbit in exactly 17 minutes. The Calvorian civilization ceased to exist. Commander Helena Vasquez watched the destruction from the bridge of her flagship. The memory of Earth, her face showing no emotion whatsoever. 17 minutes, she said quietly to her second-in-command. 1 minute for every day that our ancestors suffered under the bombardment of their homeworld. The mathematics of vengeance were precise and deliberate. A message that the other Concord species would soon learn to understand. News of the Calvorian extinction reached the High Council within hours, carried by terrified traders who had witnessed the attack from the safety of nearby. Space Arbiter Velcroth stared at the reports in disbelief, his ancient mind struggling to comprehend what he was reading. An entire elder species wiped out in minutes by an enemy that no one had even known existed. Who? He demanded, his voice cracking with an emotion he had not felt in centuries. Fear. Who could do such a thing? The answer came in the form of a broadcast that was transmitted to every communication device in the Concord simultaneously. It showed a human woman with cold gray eyes and silver hair, standing on the bridge of a warship unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. My name is Helena Vasquez, she said in a voice that carried the weight of 50 years of hatred. And I am the commander of the human fleet. Velcroth felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. 50 years ago, you came to our world and murdered 4 billion innocent people, Helena continued. You burned our cities, poisoned our oceans, and turned our beautiful blue planet into a lifeless rock. And you did all of this because you were afraid of what we might become. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with fury. You were right to be afraid, she said. But you made one mistake. You did not finish the job. And now we have returned to collect what is owed. The transmission ended, and panic erupted across the Concord species that had not spoken to each other in centuries. suddenly found themselves allied. By a common terror, emergency fleets were assembled. Defensive positions were established, and diplomatic envoys were dispatched to plead for peace. Ambassador Thelvan of the Morvix hegemony was the first to attempt negotiation. His species had been among the most enthusiastic supporters of Earth's destruction. But now he was willing to offer anything to avoid sharing the Kelvarians' fate. "We can provide compensation," he transmitted desperately. "Territories, resources, technology, whatever you desire. Just name your terms and we will meet them." Helena's response was simple and devastating. She sent him footage of Earth's final hours. Children screaming as fire rained from the sky. Families clinging to each other as their cities crumbled. The desperate last transmissions of people who knew they were about to die after the footage ended. Coordinates appeared on Ambassador Thelvan's screen. They were the coordinates of his own homeworld. "Those are my terms," Helena said flatly. "You have 3 days to evacuate any civilians you wish to save, but I promise you this, in 3 days. The Morvix hegemony will no longer exist," the ambassador begged, pleaded, offered to surrender unconditionally. But Helena had already ended the transmission. 3 days later, the Morvix homeworld burned just as Earth had burned, and their species joined the Kelvarians in extinction. Pattern repeated itself with terrible consistency over the following months. The Trani were destroyed next. Their underwater cities boiled away by orbital bombardment. The Vexal followed. Their fortress world cracked open like an egg by concentrated gravity lance fire. The Drakath, the Morvani, the Selthri one by one. The species that had voted for Earth's destruction were systematically erased from existence. Each attack was broadcast across the galaxy so that the remaining Concord species could watch and understand what awaited them. Grand Admiral Kethrall of the Concord military studied the human attack patterns with growing horror. He was considered the finest tactical mind in the galaxy, a strategist who had won 100 battles against overwhelming odds. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was seeing. "They are not waging war," he reported to the High Council, his mandibles trembling as he spoke. "War implies negotiation, implies goals that can be achieved through compromise, implies the possibility of surrender." He paused, struggling to find the words to describe what the humans were doing. "This is extermination," he finally said, pure and simple. "And they will not stop until every species responsible for Earth's destruction has been wiped from existence." High Arbiter Velkreth slammed his fist against his throne in frustrated rage. "Then we will destroy them first," he shouted. "Gather every warship from every species. Assemble the greatest fleet the galaxy has ever seen, and crush these human insects once and for all." Admiral Kethrall wanted to object, wanted to point out that the humans had anticipated and countered every tactic the Concord had tried so far, wanted to suggest that perhaps there was still some way to negotiate a peace. But he looked at the terrified faces around him and knew that no one would listen. Fear had replaced reason, and the Concord was committed to a battle that would determine the fate of the galaxy itself. 12,000 warships began gathering at the designated coordinates they represented, the combined military might of every surviving Concord species. The largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Surely, Velkreth told himself, surely this would be enough to destroy the human menace. He had no idea how wrong he was. The Concord Armada gathered in the Shrieking Stars system, a remote region of space named for the strange sounds its pulsars emitted across radio frequencies. 12,000 warships hung in formation against the backdrop of swirling nebulae, their weapons charged, their crews ready for battle. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of galactic civilization, representing the combined military might of every surviving member species of the Concord High Arbiter Velkreth observed the magnificent display from the bridge of his flagship, the Divine Judgment, and felt his confidence returning. Surely no enemy could stand against such overwhelming force. The human fleet was estimated at 300 ships. Perhaps fewer even if the humans possessed superior technology. 40-to-1 odds were impossible to overcome. Today we end this threat once and for all, Velkreth announced to his assembled admirals. Today we prove that the Galactic Concord remains the supreme power in this universe. Grand Admiral Kethril stood silently behind his leader, his compound eyes scanning the tactical displays with growing unease. Something felt wrong about this situation. The humans had demonstrated incredible tactical intelligence throughout this war. Yet they had allowed the location of this battle to be leaked to Concord intelligence. Why would such careful enemies walk into such an obvious trap? The answer became terrifyingly clear when the first human ships appeared. They did not materialize in front of the Concord fleet as expected, where the massed firepower of 12,000 ships could destroy them instantly. Instead, they appeared everywhere at once, scattered throughout the formation, like wolves materializing within a herd of sheep, and they were not alone. Asteroid swarms emerged from Phase Cloak, alongside the human vessels. Millions of rocks ranging from the size of a fist to the size of a small moon, all accelerated to 90% of light speed at such velocities. Even the smallest rock carried the kinetic energy of a nuclear warhead. The asteroids tore through the tightly packed Concord formation like bullets through paper, and ships that had been preparing to fire on distant enemies suddenly found themselves being destroyed by projectiles they never even saw coming. Evasive maneuvers, screamed Admiral Kethril. But it was already too late. The Concord fleet had been arranged for maximum concentrated firepower, which meant the ships were dangerously close to each other, which meant they had nowhere to go when the asteroids hit vessels, crashed into their neighbors while trying to dodge, creating chain reactions of destruction that claimed dozens of ships at a time. The human warships did not even engage directly at first. They simply maintained their positions and watched as the Concord fleet tore itself apart. When the asteroid barrage finally ended, 4,000 Concord ships had been destroyed or disabled without a single human vessel firing a shot. Kraft stared at his tactical display in disbelief as the numbers updated themselves. A third of his fleet gone in less than 2 minutes. Regroup and counterattack, he ordered desperately, but the humans had anticipated this as well as the surviving Concord ships attempted to reform their battle lines. They found themselves caught in artificial gravity wells that the human vessels had deployed during the chaos. Ships that tried to accelerate forward found themselves being dragged backward. Ships that tried to turn found themselves spinning uncontrollably. Orderly formation became a chaotic mess of vessels crashing into each other, unable to coordinate their movements or their fire. And then the drone swarms arrived. They poured from the human warships in numbers that defied comprehension. Billions of tiny machines that moved with perfect coordination. Each drone was no larger than a clenched fist, armed with a laser capable of cutting through hull plating, and equipped with sensors that could identify the weakest points in any ship's defenses. The swarms descended upon the trapped Concord vessels. Like locusts upon a wheat field, they crawled across hull surfaces, burning through armor, sabotaging weapon systems, and disabling engines. Ships that managed to destroy thousands of drones simply watched in horror as the swarms consumed the wreckage of destroyed vessels and used the raw materials to create replacements. Every drone killed 2 more were born. Admiral Kethril watched his tactical display turn from green to red as ship after ship reported critical damage or went silent entirely. Had studied warfare his entire life, had written textbooks on fleet tactics that were taught in military academies across the Concord. But nothing had prepared him for this. The humans were not fighting a battle. They were conducting an execution on the bridge of the memory of Earth. Commander Helena Vasquez observed the slaughter with cold satisfaction. "Order the gravity lances to focus on their capital ships," she commanded. "Let the drones handle the rest." Invisible beams of concentrated gravitational force reached out across the battlefield and found their targets, the Concorde's mighty battleships. Each 1 kilometers long and bristling with weapons that could devastate planets, began to twist and deform as impossible. Forces pulled at their structures, metal screamed as it was, stretched beyond its limits. Reactors overloaded as containment fields failed under the strain. Ship after ship collapsed in upon itself, crushed by the very fabric of space-time. After 6 hours of continuous battle, the Concorde Armada had been reduced to fewer than 3,000 functional vessels. Most of them too damaged to fight effectively. Human losses stood at 14 ships. Volkroth sat in his command chair, surrounded by the wreckage of his fleet and the ruin of his pride. His flagship had lost primary power. Its weapons were offline, and fires burned throughout its lower decks. Everything he had believed about the Concorde's invincibility had been proven. Catastrophically wrong. A communication request appeared on his damaged screen. It was Commander Vasquez, calling to speak with him directly. "What do you want?" Velcroth demanded, his voice hoarse with despair. "We can give you worlds, power, anything you desire. Just name your terms." Helena's face appeared on the screen, her expression utterly without mercy. "You took everything from us," she said quietly. "Our home, our families, our future, our place in the universe, and you thought you were being wise. Thought you were protecting your precious Concorde from a future threat." She leaned closer to the camera, her gray eyes reflecting the fires burning across the battlefield. "You were right," she continued. "We are a threat. And now you will learn what humanity does to those who threaten us first." The transmission ended seconds later. A gravity lance tore through the Divine Judgment's reactor core, and High Arbiter Velcroth died in a flash of light and radiation, his final thought being the horrified realization that he had doomed his entire civilization. The Battle of Shrieking Stars was over. The Galactic Concorde had lost. 100 years had passed since the burning of Earth, and the galaxy had been transformed beyond recognition. The Galactic Concorde that had ruled the stars for 40,000 years no longer existed. Its council chambers stood empty. Its laws had been erased from every database, and its name was spoken only as a warning to future generations of the 12 elder species that had once sat upon the High Council. 8 had been completely exterminated, their homeworlds reduced to lifeless rocks, their populations wiped out down to the last individual. The remaining 4 species had surrendered unconditionally after the Battle of Shrieking Stars, their leaders kneeling before human commanders and begging for the chance to serve rather than be destroyed. Commander Helena Vasquez had not lived to see the final victory. She had died leading the assault on the Concorde's capital world, her flagship destroyed by a desperate suicide attack from the last defenders of the old order. But she had died knowing that humanity's vengeance was complete, that the species who had murdered Earth would never harm anyone again. And that was enough for her. Admiral Marcus Chun now led the human forces, a man who had been born on remembrance and had grown up hearing stories of Earth's destruction from his grandmother. One of the original survivors, he stood before the newly formed Galactic Assembly, a gathering of representatives from every surviving species in the known universe, and delivered humanity's terms for the future. "There will be no negotiation," he announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "There will be no compromise. There will be no appeals to fairness or justice or mercy." The assembled aliens listened in terrified silence, knowing that their very existence depended on their complete submission. "The species who surrender to us will serve humanity's expansion," Chum continued. Your technology, your resources, your labor will fuel the growth of a human empire that will span this galaxy, and eventually, others. He paused and looked out at the sea of alien faces, seeing fear in every eye. In exchange, you will be permitted to exist, he said simply. Resist us, and you will join the Calvarians and the Moravics and all the others who thought they could stand against human determination. No one objected. No one dared over the following decades. Human colony ships spread across the galaxy like a tide that could not be stopped. Worlds that had once belonged to the elder species now bore human names and flew human flags. The great cities of the Concord were rebuilt to serve human purposes, their alien architecture modified to accommodate human preferences. Children born in these colonies learned about Earth through memorial halls that existed on every settled world. Massive structures that displayed footage of the burning and recited the names of the dead. They learned to hate the species that had committed this crime. Even the ones that had surrendered, even the ones that now served humanity faithfully. Trust was not something that could be rebuilt in a single generation, or perhaps ever in the restored archives of the extinct Calvarian species. Human scholars discovered the private journals of High Arbiter Volkruth, the leader who had ordered Earth's destruction. His final entry, written hours before his death at the Battle of Shrieking Stars, became required reading in every human school. We believed ourselves the apex predators of the cosmos, Volkruth had written. We had culled hundreds of species over 40 millennia, shaping galactic civilization according to our vision of order and stability. The students would read these words and feel nothing but contempt for the arrogance they represented. But we made one fatal error. The entry continued. We assumed that all species respond to extinction the way we do, with despair, with surrender, with acceptance of the inevitable. And humans do not surrender. Teachers would pause at this point and ask their students to consider what made humanity different from the elder species. The answers varied, but they always came back to the same core truth. Humans do not despair, the entry went on. When you push humanity to the brink of annihilation, they do not break as other species do. They transform into something else entirely. Something patient, something brilliant, something that will cross any distance, wait any length of time, sacrifice anything and everything for revenge. Admiral Chun himself visited the memorial on remembrance every year on the anniversary of Earth's destruction. He would stand before the steel monument that bore the original colony's founding charter and read the 3 words that had guided humanity through 50 years of preparation and 50 years of war: return, reclaim, revenge. All 3 objectives had been achieved. Earth itself remained a dead world, too damaged by the bombardment to ever support life again. But human scientists were working on restoring it in another century. Perhaps 2, the oceans might flow again, the forests might grow, and the cradle of humanity might welcome its children home. Until then, the memorial on remembrance would serve as humanity's spiritual center, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained. The final entry in Volkruth's journal had become famous across the galaxy, quoted by human leaders and whispered fearfully by the surviving alien species. We thought we were removing a threat, the old High Arbiter had written. Instead, we created the galaxy's new nightmare, and it will never, ever stop. On the bridge of a human dreadnought orbiting what had once been the Concord's throne world, Admiral Chun read these words on the anniversary of his grandmother's death. She had been one of the original 200,000 survivors, had helped build the colony on remembrance, had raised 3 generations of warriors, and had died peacefully at the age of 117. Satisfied that her great-grandchildren would live in a galaxy that would never again threaten humanity. They finally understand, Chum said quietly, looking out at the stars that now belonged to his species. We do not forgive. we do not forget. And we never stop. His first officer, a young woman named Sarah Vasquez, the great-great-granddaughter of Commander Helena Vasquez herself, stood beside him and nodded. The elder species thought they were the masters of the universe, she said. They thought they could destroy anyone who threatened their power. They thought they were the nightmare that other species feared. She smiled coldly, the same smile her ancestor had worn while watching the Kelvorian homeworld burn. They were wrong, she continued. They were never the nightmare. They were just the darkness that existed before we arrived. And now the darkness has been replaced by something far more terrifying. Admiral Chun nodded and gave the order to resume. Patrol somewhere out there. Beyond the edges of known space, other civilizations existed. Civilizations that had not yet encountered humanity. They did not know what was coming for them. Did not know that a new power had risen to dominate the galaxy. Did not know that the children of Earth had become the very thing their ancestors had tried to prevent. The galactic concord had awakened. Humanity's wrath now, the entire universe would live with the consequences forever.